Hello friend, thanks for joining me for another book chat. Today let's spend some time with Cosmic Consciousness, a study of the evolution of the human mind by Richard Maurice Bucke. This book was originally published in 1901, and I decided to read this because has been referenced in several other books that I've read over the last few years and chatted here on my channel. And so I was really curious to get this one read because it was a very early work in this topic of consciousness and the evolution of consciousness, how consciousness changes over time. Published in 1901, I have heard that this was the first use of the term cosmic consciousness. He was a Canadian psychiatrist who studied, the human mind and human consciousness. And this book really delves into this topic in kind of an interesting way. So we'll go into that a bit. So it basically talks about the term cosmic consciousness and how humans have had these different types of consciousness. This particular book talks about three types of consciousness: simple consciousness, self-consciousness, and then cosmic consciousness. So simple consciousness is the consciousness of all living things. So really, basically, like all animals have. Animals have simple consciousness. And in his view, humans started out this way with simple consciousness. Then, over time, humans developed this the ability to have self-consciousness. And this is really awareness of oneself, which animals don't seem to have this in the same way. But this term self-consciousness here is only referring to the ability to think like I am, like to think of the future, to think of putting yourself in context with other things. And so this is self-consciousness. And then cosmic consciousness is a type of consciousness that most humans have not yet reached, but in the view of Richard Bucke, this will be our evolutionary future. So there's a quote here that I think explains this from the book that says, "The prime characteristic of cosmic consciousness is, as the name implies, a consciousness of the cosmos, that is, of the life and order of the universe. Along with the consciousness of the cosmos, there occurs an intellectual enlightenment or illumination, which alone would place the individual on a new plane of existence, would make him almost a member of a new species." Okay, so it's talking about this prime characteristic is awareness of life and order of the cosmos. This is actually self-consciousness. If we just had this simple idea that there is a cosmos, there is a universe outside the world, like this is our rational thought. This is self-consciousness. But the added sort of idea of this intellectual enlightenment, where the person who undergoes this experience of awakening into cosmic consciousness actually feels themselves to be a part of the cosmos, or to feel or to understand something on a different level. It's not just a simple reasoning that there exists the heavens or there exist planets. It's actually more of a participation. And I'm going to talk more about that here in a bit. But that is really sort of a key difference. So this book actually does talk about several concepts that have appeared in other works that I've read and chatted here on my channel. And I just thought I would relate them because this particular book, doesn't go into these topics quite nearly in the detail that these other works that I'm going to mention do. These other works that I'm going to mention came later, but nevertheless, Bucke does talk about the concepts that are also present in these other works. And the first one here is Seeing Through the World, Jean Gebser and Integral Consciousness by Jeremy Johnson. I'll link to these chats down in the details below. But this book talks about the philosophy of Jean Gebser and this integral thinking, integral consciousness. So in the view, just the shorthand view here is that sort of the go along with Bucke is that humans have had different types of consciousness in the past, and we are moving towards a new form of consciousness that Gebser calls an integral consciousness. And that eventually we all carry our previous forms of consciousness, but eventually we will be able to integrate those. And when we do, we will have a quite different understanding, quite different consciousness than we currently do. Another work that talks about the topics in this book is Lost Knowledge of the Imagination by Gary Lachman. And this book really explores the concept of participation in the cosmos. So it's not just aware that the cosmos exists, but it's the feeling, it's the intuition of knowing our participation in it. So you no longer feel like an individual person. The person who experiences this cosmic consciousness or this imaginal consciousness that Gary Lachman talks about is actually participating in the cosmos, participating in creation. And then The Phenomenon of Man by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin discusses the omega point. In Chardin's view, the omega point, and again, he feels this thinker feels that human consciousness is changing into something else, and that when enough people reach the point where they have shifted over into the new consciousness, humanity will then reach what he called an omega point, and we will then become basically a different species. And then another book I read by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, The Future of Man, discusses the omega point less in this particular book, but discusses the noosphere, which is this realm of human consciousness really participating in the creation then of the world, or of our world. And then finally, this book that I read a while back, A History in English Words by Owen Barfield. This particular book talks about language and how language, if you study the evolution of language and how words, the meaning of words have changed over the course of thousands of years or millennia, you can understand how consciousness has changed. And Bucke talks about this as well. He actually brings a couple of examples that I'm not familiar with, and I don't know if this is true or not, but the idea that just through the study of language that humans have not always understood or had a consciousness of fragrance, or they've also not had a consciousness of all the different colors. Like if you see a color wheel at a hardware store for paint, today there's this huge color wheel, and we have an understanding of really hundreds of colors nowadays. But in Bucke's view, humans have not always had this ability. In fact, that back in the earliest times of our consciousness, humans were only able to see certain colors or understand certain colors, the first one being red. So I don't know if that's true, if that evidence has held up over the course of the last 120 some odd years since this book was published, but nevertheless, I thought it was super interesting. All right, so marks of the cosmic sense. So I'll spend a few minutes on this. He goes through and really analyzes people from history who have had what he considers to be the cosmic sense, or have had this awakening into cosmic consciousness. And the first thing he talks about is a subjective light. These people often report seeing some sort of light or some sort of connection to light. The other is the moral elevation, where again the person feels connected to something way higher, the divine, basically. So elevating their everyday consciousness more into that of divinity. And then the intellectual illumination, where the participants or these people report that they have had some sort of flash of inspiration, or they understand the connections of the universe now better than they did before. There's a sense of immortality, meaning the eternity of the cosmos, and how the participant is a part of that. Going along with that would be the loss of the fear of death, and the loss of the sense of sin, because sin is one of those things that would take you away from this sort of state of grace. And so in this sort of state, the presence of sin seems to not be there and not even be possible. the experience is sudden, so it's the suddenness, instantaneousness of the awakening. Most participants, or many of them, report a very sudden awakening. The previous character of the man, intellectual, moral, and physical. So Bucke talks about this a bit, and part of this was a little cringy to me, was like that a person needs to be a tip-top sort of physical specimen. To me, this sort of reflected maybe some biases of his time, be like pleasing, like handsome, extremely handsome, very intelligent. This might just be more of a factor of who wrote their experiences down as far as the intellectual goes, but nevertheless, he has that as one of his criteria. And then the age of illumination, he marks it in the early 30s as a typical age for when this happens, although there were cases of earlier and later that he studies. And then the added charm to the personality, so that men and women are always strongly attracted to the person. So the person becomes kind of a person that people are drawn to, naturally drawn to, following this sort of experience. And then the transfiguration of the subject of the change as seen by others when the cosmic sense is actually present. So other people report that knew these people before can report that this person has changed significantly from what they were previously. So most of the book actually is spent talking about these particular case studies. There are tons of them. Buddha, Jesus, the Apostle Paul. I just wrote a few down. Plotinus, Muhammad, Dante, Francis Bacon. Very interestingly enough, Bucke felt that Francis Bacon actually wrote the Shakespeare plays and the sonnets, so he doesn't give Shakespeare a separate. He thinks that Shakespeare didn't actually write these plays, but Francis Bacon did. But if Shakespeare wrote the plays and the sonnets themselves, then he would also be a case, according to Bucke. William Blake, Walt Whitman, and many others are discussed in detail. People from history, from many cultures, I think most cultures in Europe and Asia were represented, or at least there was one Chinese example, if I remember right, several Indian, and also Middle Eastern as well as European. But there's a quote here about Dante. It says, after illumination, Dante wrote the Divine Comedy. In it, as a whole, must be sought the expression, such as Dante could give, of the cosmic vision. It is therefore a parallel statement with the Quran, the Upanishads, Suttas, the Pauline epistles, the words of Jesus, the Comedy Humaine, the Leaves of Grass, the Shakespeare drama and sonnets, the works of Bayman, and Towards Democracy. He's saying that all these people experienced the same thing or a similar thing. They wrote about it quite differently, though. So I thought that was really interesting. So I'll kind of close this with a quote from Balzac that asks his friend in a letter, "Are you certain," he said, "that your soul has had its full development? Do you breathe in air through every pore of it? Do your eyes see all they can see?" I think that is so cool. A nice quote to end with this chat. All right, I enjoyed reading this a lot. It is a bit dated for its content. As I mentioned, there's lots of works since then that have built on this work, and I just love this topic, and I will continue reading on this topic, so stay tuned for more coming up in the future. My next chat is going to be White Noise by Don DeLillo. I have finished this already, and I will have a chat on it coming up soon. Until next time, take care.